welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be kicking this off.
So today we're tackling something really vital in healthcare, how it actually gets better, safer for everyone.
Yeah, we're looking at what's called quality improvement research, often just called QI.
QI, right. And this is maybe a bit different from what people typically think of as medical research.
That's right. It's less about discovering, say, a brand new cure, and more about the science of making sure the care we already have is delivered in the best way possible.
Okay. And we're drawing on an article from Academic Radiology that really gets into the nitty-gritty of how this works.
Exactly. It uses radiology as its main example, but honestly, the ideas apply pretty much everywhere in healthcare.
So our mission for you, the listener, is to really get a handle on how healthcare pros study and make changes to improve things, going beyond just, oh, this seems like a good idea.
Yeah, moving beyond common sense to actual systematic improvement.
Okay, let's dive in. What's the big difference between this QI research and, the traditional scientific research we hear more about?
That's a really good starting point. So traditional research, think drug trials, right? It's all about testing a hypothesis, trying super hard to minimize bias, and aiming for knowledge you can generalize. Apply widely.
Like, will this work for lots of different people in lots of different places?
Precisely. QI research, though, it's got a much more focused goal. It's about creating positive change in a specific local setting.
Okay, local. Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine a team in one particular hospital's radiology department. They want to figure out how to get scan results back to the referring doctors faster. That's a QI project.
Got it. So traditional research might be asking why something works biologically, maybe. Well, QI is asking how we make this process work better here.
You've nailed it. And because it's so context-specific, QI often relies on getting feedback really quickly and making adjustments on the fly. You don't always need to understand the absolute deepest why for it to be effective in that setting.
But there's some overlap, right? The article mentioned they both use hypothesis testing.
Oh, definitely. Both involve testing ideas in a structured way, but QI brings in some unique elements too.
Like what? What's specific to QI?
Well, things like setting really clear, measurable goals up front, then having specific ways to track performance metrics and using that data to see if things are actually improving.
Okay, so data is key.
Hugely. And also standardizing the things that work so everyone does it the same way, plus a big focus on education to make sure the changes stick.
Right, so it's not just a one-off fix. Now, this brings up something interesting you mentioned from the article, this debate, about making changes in healthcare sometimes without that super strong traditional proof. Sounds a bit risky.
It's definitely a balancing act, and there are strong opinions on both sides.
Okay, what's the argument for, going ahead sometimes?
Well, proponents argue that getting that traditional high-level evidence, like from a big randomized controlled trial, can be really difficult, sometimes impossible.
Why is that?
Think about trying to improve teamwork in an ER. It's hard to blind people, right? Or to perfectly match control groups. Plus, the specific way a hospital is set up, its culture, that can make a huge difference. What works perfectly in one place might just not translate easily to another.
That makes sense. It's not a sterile lab environment. But what's the counter-argument? The risk side.
The valid concern is, if you implement changes without good evidence they actually work, you might waste time, money, resources.
Or worse.
Or potentially even cause harm, yeah. If an intervention doesn't actually improve things or has unintended negative consequences, so caution is definitely needed.
The article gave a great example of a successful QI effort, though. The Image Gently campaign, what was that about?
Image Gently is a fantastic case study. It was focused within radiology, aiming to reduce radiation doses for children undergoing medical imaging.
Simple goal, sounds important.
Exactly. It wasn't based on some radical new scientific discovery. It was about raising awareness, standardizing protocols for lower doses, providing educational tools, basically getting everyone on the same page about being careful with radiation in kids.
And it worked.
It was widely adopted and is seen as a major success in promoting safer imaging practices. It really shows how a focused QI approach with clear goals and buy-in can make a big difference across many institutions.
Okay, so if it's not always these huge, complex trials, how do they study QI? What methods are they using to see if an intervention is actually, working?
It's actually a pretty diverse toolkit. QI borrows study designs from health services research, even social sciences sometimes.
But the goal is still the same. Show the change, cause the improvement.
Fundamentally, yes. You're trying to establish that link, that the thing you changed led to the better outcome you wanted. The specific design you choose just depends on the question, the setting, and how much control you have.
The article brought up qualitative methods. That sounds
Mhm.
less about numbers and more about feelings, perspectives.
Kind of, yeah. Qualitative methods are super important in QI. They help researchers understand the why behind the numbers, the experiences, attitudes, beliefs of patients and staff.
How so?
Well, you might measure if a new process is faster, but talking to the nurses using it through interviews or focus groups might reveal why it's faster, or maybe uncover unexpected problems or benefits that the numbers alone wouldn't show you. It adds crucial context.
Okay, context is key. Then there are the smaller projects. The article mentioned things like Lean, Six Sigma. Sounds like stuff from manufacturing.
Exactly. A lot of QI work, especially on specific processes, uses tools adapted from industry. Think Deming's continuous improvement cycle, or Lean's focus on eliminating waste like unnecessary steps in a workflow, or long waits.
Running out the fat, basically.
Pretty much. Or Six Sigma, which aims to reduce errors and variation to almost zero. These often use structured cycles. Maybe you've heard of PDSA.
Plan, do, study, act.
That's the one. You plan a small change, you try it out, you study the results, and then you act based on what you learned, either adopting the change, adapting it, or abandoning it.
So little experiments, learning as you go.
Right. Or another framework is DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. It's all about incremental cyclical change and learning.
Okay. Now, what about these quasi-experimental designs? Sounds almost experimental.
Yeah, the name gives it away a bit. They're very common in QI, precisely because those full-blown randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, are often just not practical or ethical in a real-world clinical setting.
So what do they look like?
Well, maybe you measure something before you introduce a change and then measure it again after, in the same group. That's an uncontrolled before and after study.
Okay, simple enough.
Or you might compare a group that gets the intervention to a similar group that doesn't, but without randomly assigning who goes where. That's a controlled before and after. Or you track data over a longer period before and after the change, a time series design.
So ways to get some evidence without the full RCT setup.
Exactly. They try to approximate experimental rigor when true randomization isn't on the table. They have limitations, of course, but they're often the best feasible option.
But sometimes they do use RCTs, or something called cluster RCTs.
Yes, absolutely. For bigger interventions, maybe things that are going to be expensive or have potentially huge impacts or that you really hope to roll out very widely, then the rigor of an RCT might be necessary and worth the effort.
And cluster RCTs, what's the cluster part?
That's when you randomize groups of people, not individuals. So instead of randomly assigning patient A to the new program and patient B to standard care, you might randomly assign Clinic 1 to use the new program and Clinic 2 to continue as usual.
Ah, why do that?
It's useful if the intervention naturally applies to a whole group, like a new way for a whole clinic's team to work together. Or sometimes it's just more practical, or helps avoid contamination where people in the control group accidentally get exposed to the intervention.
Makes sense. Okay, so we have all these ways to study the changes. How do they actually measure if it's working? What are the yardsticks for success?
Great question. That comes down to quality measures. These are the specific metrics used to track performance and outcomes.
And there are different types.
Broadly, yes. The article breaks them down nicely. You've got structure measures. These look at the setting of care, the resources, the equipment, the staffing.
Like, does this hospital have a state-of-the-art MRI machine or enough specialist nurses?
Exactly. Then you have process measures. These track whether the steps of care are being followed correctly according to guidelines or best practices.
Wait times again. Or did patients get the recommended screening test?
Precisely. Turnaround times for lab tests, adherence to protocols, things like that. And finally, outcome measures. These look at the end results of care for the patient.
The bottom line, really, like infection rates, patient satisfaction scores, mortality rates.
You got it. Those are the big ones. Did the patient get better? Were they happy with their care? Did any harm occur?
So it's like assessing a restaurant. Structure is the clean kitchen. Process is how fast the food comes out. Outcome is, was the food good?
That's a perfect analogy. You really need all three to get a full picture of quality.
But picking the right measures must be important too.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole field of study itself. You need to ensure the measure is feasible. Can you actually collect the data reliably? Is it reliable? Does it measure consistently? Is it valid? Does it truly measure the aspect of quality you care about?
And you have to watch out for unintended consequences, right?
Definitely. If you focus too heavily on one measure, say reducing wait times at all costs, you might inadvertently pressure staff to cut corners elsewhere, potentially impacting safety or accuracy. It's a complex balancing act.
Okay, one more area the article touched on, ethics. How does QI fit with research ethics boards like IRBs? Does every little improvement project need formal approval?
That's a really practical point. Generally, the view is that most local QI activities are considered part of routine clinical practice and operational improvement, not formal human subjects research that needs a full, intensive institutional review board review.
Why is that the distinction?
The thinking is that the primary goal is to improve care for the patients right there in that setting, using established practices or methods. And subjecting every small PDSA cycle to a lengthy IRB process could really slow down or even prevent necessary rapid improvements.
So it's seen more as professional responsibility.
In many cases, yes. Part of delivering high-quality care is constantly looking for ways to do it better. However, if a QI project starts looking more like research, maybe it's testing something really novel, or aims primarily to generate generalizable knowledge, or carries more than minimal risk, then IRB oversight might well be needed. It's often a gray area.
Right. Lastly, let's talk about sharing this knowledge. If QI is often so local, why bother publishing it?
That's a great point to end on. Even if a project starts locally, publishing the findings, what worked, what didn't, how it was done, the context is really encouraged and valuable.
Why? Who benefits?
Everyone, potentially. It builds a collective knowledge base. Another hospital facing a similar problem doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. They can learn from other successes and, just as importantly, their failures or challenges. It helps spread good ideas and prevents others from repeating mistakes.
So it contributes to the wider field of healthcare improvement, even if it started small.
Exactly. It turns local learning into shared learning.
Okay, so let's quickly recap this deep dive. Quality improvement research, or QI, it's this essential part of healthcare focused on making care better and safer right where it happens.
Right. It uses a whole range of methods, borrowing from science, industry, social science, from those small, rapid PDSA cycles to sometimes larger, more formal trials like RCTs.
And measurement is absolutely key, tracking structure, process, and outcomes to see if changes are actually working.
And sharing that knowledge, even from local projects, is vital for everyone to learn and improve. It's a continuous cycle, really.
Not just a one-off fix, but an ongoing journey.
Precisely.
Okay, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Think about these ideas: setting goals, measuring progress somehow, learning from what happens, making adjustments. How could you apply that kind of systematic thinking to other parts of your own life or work? Even without calling it research, what kind of measures could you track to see if you're making the positive changes you want? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.